The email arrived at 4:17 on a Friday afternoon. Which, if you've spent any time in corporate America, you already know is the coward's favorite time slot. It gives the sender exactly enough runway to close their laptop, grab their keys, slip down to the parking garage, and merge onto the freeway before the recipient has had time to finish reading the second sentence and fully process what's been done to them. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there in my inbox, bold, unread, pulsing like a slow migraine in the center of my monitor, while I took a deliberate sip of lukewarm green tea and looked around the open floor plan of Zephyr Stream. Zephyr Stream was a mid-sized SaaS company in Silicon Valley. We disrupted things. That was the official story. What we actually did was sell enterprise software to defense contractors and government logistics firms, while a rotating cast of men in Patagonia vests told each other they were changing the world. The office smelled permanently of roasted coffee beans and quiet desperation. To my left, the sales team was playing ping pong and high-fiving over a deal I knew for a fact they had structured incorrectly. I had flagged the indemnification language 3 weeks earlier. Nobody had responded to my email. To my right, the marketing interns were filming a TikTok about hustle culture. I clicked the email. Hi Mara, thanks for your patience regarding the compensation adjustment request. We've reviewed your performance metrics, which remain stellar. However, due to current reallocation of Q3 liquidity into strategic acquisition channels, your raise got lost in legal. We simply don't have the approval code to push it through this cycle. Let's revisit next quarter. Best, Tyler, HR business partner. I read it once. Twice. A third time. Lost in legal. I set down my tea. I took off my glasses and cleaned them with the microfiber cloth I keep in my top drawer because I am the kind of person who keeps a microfiber cloth in her top drawer, organized, precise, meticulous about the details that other people overlook. And I felt something shift very quietly in the back of my brain. Not anger. Not the hot, disorganized fury that makes people send emails they later regret. Something colder than that. Sharper. The particular clarity that comes when you have been patient for a very long time, and have finally, completely, run out of patience. Lost in legal. I am legal. I am the senior contracts and IP analyst at Zephyr Stream. I am the person who reads the 400-page documents that the sales team signs without looking. I am the one who makes sure we don't accidentally sell our source code to a shell company, or accidentally agree to unlimited liability in a vendor contract, or accidentally waive our right to arbitration in 12 jurisdictions simultaneously. I am the invisible guardrail on a highway full of people who are driving much too fast, and have never once considered what happens when the guardrail isn't there. And my raise got lost in legal. I put my glasses back on. I looked at the sales team. They were celebrating the Vanguard account, an $80 million joint venture with a major defense logistics firm. The deal that was going to make Zephyr Stream a unicorn. The deal that had paid for the CEO's new glass-walled office, and his new Porsche, and the company's new espresso machine that cost $20,000, and that nobody actually knew how to operate. I had written that contract. Not the glossy pitch deck. Not the handshake. Not the celebratory dinner at a restaurant where the steaks cost more than my car payment. I had written the master service agreement, the IP indemnity schedule, and a 60-page addendum on royalty structures that I had drafted alone, at 11 o'clock at night, 3 years ago, when the company was cash poor and desperate and needed Vanguard to sign before the quarter closed. I had written every word. I stood up. My knees popped slightly, which is what happens when you're 42, and have been sitting at a desk reading legal documents for 15 years straight. I walked past the ping-pong table. Hey Mara, smile, it's Friday. Braden from account executive shouted, banking a shot off the wall. Have a great weekend, Braden, I said. I walked to the secure file room at the end of the hall. I had the combination to the safe. Of course I had the combination. I was the only person in the building who ever went in there. The room smelled of ozone and cool, undisturbed air. The heavy steel cabinet sat in the corner, bolted to the concrete floor, utterly indifferent to everything happening on the other side of the door. I spun the dial. Click. Click. Clack. I pulled out the binder. Navy blue. 3 inches thick. Labeled in my own handwriting on a white adhesive strip, Vanguard Licensing Agreement, executed copy. I opened it to page 42. Clause 14C. The font was Times New Roman, size 10. Small. Unassuming. The kind of language that is specifically designed to make your eyes want to slide over it and move on to something easier. I had written it that way deliberately. In the event that the licensor achieves 3 consecutive quarters of 99.99% uptime, while processing in excess of 5 terabytes of client data, the parties acknowledge that intellectual property rights for the core algorithm shall shift to a shared royalty model, entitling the original IP architect to a retroactive commission of 0.5% of gross contract value, unless a waiver is signed by said architect. I checked the signature page. CEO of Vanguard Defense Logistics, signed. CEO of Zephyr Stream, signed. And on the bottom line, on the space marked IP architect/drafting analyst. Signed, Mara L. I closed the binder. The silence in that file room was the most complete silence I had experienced in years. Lost in legal, I whispered to the empty room. The irony was almost architectural in its perfection. My raise wasn't lost. It had been sitting on page 42 of a navy blue binder in a fireproof safe for 3 years, patiently accumulating interest, waiting for someone to come find it. I slipped the binder into my tote bag. Technically, removing original documents is a violation of company policy. But so is wage theft. And I had a strong feeling that by Monday morning, company policy was going to be the least of anyone's concerns. My home office is everything that Zephyr Stream's headquarters is not. It's quiet in the way that spaces become quiet when the person who inhabits them takes the quality of silence seriously. It's organized with the particular precision of someone who has spent 15 years understanding that the difference between winning and losing a legal dispute often comes down to whether you can find the right document in under 30 seconds. There is a very efficient espresso machine on the counter. There is a bookshelf where every contract I have ever drafted is filed by date and client. There is a cat named Caesar who expresses his opinions about my work habits through sustained, unblinking eye contact from a sunbeam on the windowsill. I had the contract. Now I needed the data. Clause 14C was what attorneys call a dormant trigger, a provision that means nothing if the underlying conditions are never met, and means everything if they are. The clause only activated if Zephyr Stream had performed with exceptional, documented consistency over a sustained period. Specifically, 3 consecutive quarters of 99.99% uptime, while processing more than 5 terabytes of client data. If the company had underperformed, the clause was a historical footnote. If they had hit those numbers. The clause woke up. I logged into the admin dashboard on my laptop. My access level at Zephyr Stream is what the engineering team calls God mode. Not because I'm a hacker. Not because I had done anything remotely unauthorized. 5 years ago, the CTO had gotten tired of manually approving my monthly requests for audit log access, and had simply given me root-level credentials to the data warehouse. He had probably forgotten he did it. People forget a lot of things about me. I pulled the uptime reports for the previous 24 months. Q1 2023 to 99.992%. Q2 2023 to 99.995%. Q3 2023 to 99.998%. 3 consecutive quarters. Documented. Time-stamped. Signed off by the engineering team and celebrated in the CEO's board presentation, which I also had a copy of because I had been in the room when he gave it. I remembered those quarters with crystalline clarity. The engineering team had slept in the office during the critical deployment windows. I had personally ordered 70 pizzas across 11 consecutive late-night sessions. The on-call rotation had consumed entire weekends. Junior developers had pushed code at 3 a.m. and then shown up for stand-up meetings 4 hours later running on caffeine and professional obligation. When the milestones were hit, the CEO had bought himself a Porsche to celebrate what he described as the team's incredible resilience. I had received a $50 Starbucks gift card. I moved to the data volume figures. Client data processed across those same 3 quarters, 12 terabytes. 15 terabytes. 22 terabytes. Way past the 5 terabyte threshold written into Clause 14C. By a factor of 4. I sat back in my chair and looked at the blue glow of the monitor for a long moment. The math was not complicated. 0.5% of $80 million is $400,000. Add the retroactive penalties for failure to provide notification once the milestones were triggered, a requirement specified in subsection C, 2 of the same clause. Add 18 months of statutory interest at the California rate. Add the fact that Zephyr Stream had been operating on an unacknowledged and unsatisfied licensing obligation for a year and a half without a single communication to the IP architect. We were looking at north of $480,000. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet. I sat on my patio and watched the California sunset turn the hills purple and orange and thought about Tyler in HR with his green smoothie and his noise-canceling headphones and his lost and legal email. He had tried to save the company perhaps $10,000 a year by denying my raise. In doing so, he had forced me to audit my own value. And the audit had come back very, very clear. Sunday evening, I picked up my phone. Not to call a lawyer. Not yet. I called Robert Vance. Robert was the general counsel for Vanguard Defense Logistics, the company on the other side of the $80 million contract I had written. He was silver-haired, impeccably tailored, and possessed of the particular stillness that very expensive attorneys develop after decades of sitting in rooms where enormous amounts of money are at stake. He had negotiated defense contracts for companies that made things that flew and detonated. He had argued before federal courts in 3 different circuits. He scared our CEO so deeply that Brett physically left the building when Robert came for quarterly review meetings. Robert answered on the second ring. Mara. His voice was gravel and aged scotch. Sunday evening. Either the servers are down or you're quitting. Neither, Robert, I said, swirling my wine. I'm reviewing the MSA we executed 3 years ago. Specifically the royalty addendum. A silence. Long deliberate. The silence of a man whose mind is moving very quickly while his exterior remains completely still. Clause 14C, he said. Not a question. He knew. Of course he knew. He was an excellent attorney, thorough, methodical, the kind of lawyer who reads every page of every document he signs regardless of length. He had almost certainly flagged Clause 14C during his initial review 3 years ago, and then signed the contract anyway, because the clause created no risk for Vanguard. It only created obligations for Zephyr Stream. Specifically, obligations to me. Clause 14C, I confirmed. It appears my company has overlooked the notification requirements. The milestones triggered 18 months ago. And they haven't paid you, Robert said. His voice had dropped an octave. It wasn't pity. It was something more predatory than pity, the focused interest of a man who has just identified a very useful lever. Not a single dollar. In fact, they just denied my annual cost of living adjustment. The email said my raise got lost in legal. Robert laughed. A dry, sharp sound, short and genuine. Mara. If they are in breach of the internal IP compensation protocols specified in that agreement, that compromises the indemnity shield for the entire software suite. Technically, Zephyr Stream is operating our systems without a valid license right now. Technically, I agreed. I thought you'd want to know before I filed anything formally. Lunch tomorrow. The place on 3rd with the terrible lighting. Noon, Robert. I hung up. My hand wasn't shaking. For the first time in 3 years, I felt entirely calm. The restaurant was dark and expensive and served steaks the size of hubcaps. Robert was already there when I arrived. Before the water came, he slid a folder across the white tablecloth. Inside it was a draft letter addressed to our CEO, demanding proof that Clause 14C had been satisfied, citing exact milestone dates and dollar amounts, signed by Vanguard's legal team. He had 48 hours to respond. And I hadn't told a single person at Zephyr Stream that the letter was coming. The restaurant was called Elmore. The kind of place where serious people make serious decisions in low light, where the waitstaff are trained to materialize exactly when needed and disappear completely when they aren't, and where the silence between courses is treated as a natural and acceptable part of the meal. Robert was already seated when I arrived, a martini sitting untouched in front of him, his silver hair catching the dim overhead light, his posture the posture of someone who has spent decades in rooms where everything is negotiable and has long since decided that the person who appears least desperate usually wins. He didn't stand when I walked in. He just nodded at the empty chair across from him. "Mara, you look like someone who knows exactly where the bodies are buried." "I dug the graves, Robert. Of course I know where they are." I sat down and ordered sparkling water from the waiter, who appeared out of the shadows and disappeared back into them. Robert didn't do small talk. He never did. It was one of the things I respected about him. "I had my team pull the contract this morning," he said, before the water arrived. "You're right. Clause 14C is ironclad. Frankly, it's brilliantly constructed. Who authorized you to include that language?" "The previous CEO. He was desperate to close the deal before the quarter ended. He told me to add whatever safeguards were necessary to protect the IP value. He assumed the clause protected the company from external threats, specifically from you, if Vanguard ever tried to claim ownership of the algorithm. He didn't realize it protected the IP creator from the company itself." Robert allowed himself a small, cold smile. "And your current general counsel, Greg, is it?" "Greg believes force majeure is a French dessert." Robert's smile didn't widen, but something shifted fractionally in his eyes. "Here's the situation from Vanguard's perspective," he said, setting his martini down and becoming very still in the way that large, expensive animals become still before they move. "We pay Zephyr Stream $20 million annually. We rely on your software for critical logistics operations. If Zephyr Stream is in breach of its own internal IP compensation obligations that are explicitly tied to the licensing structure of the agreement, that creates a liability chain that affects the validity of our entire service relationship. If I pursue an injunction," I said, "I could theoretically freeze access to the code base." "Theoretically. But I don't want to damage the product. I built the underlying architecture. I just want what the contract specifies is mine." "And you want them to understand," Robert said, "that lost in legal is not a legally recognized accounting strategy. I want them to feel the weight of what they've ignored." Robert reached into his briefcase and produced a folder, thin, precisely organized, the kind of document that takes more work to make look simple than most people understand. He slid it across the tablecloth. "This is not legal advice," he said. The standard professional disclaimer that both of us understood was entirely ceremonial at this point. "But Vanguard takes contractual compliance extremely seriously. If we were to learn that a key vendor had failed to honor its obligations to its primary IP architect, obligations that are structurally tied to the validity of our licensing agreement, we would have no choice but to issue a formal notice of inquiry. We would demand a full audit of all IP-related disbursements. We would require written confirmation that the software we are currently operating is free of all encumbrances and unresolved claims." I opened the folder. It was a draft letter addressed to Brett Sterling, CEO of Zephyr Stream. Urgent audit, intellectual property compliance and royalty obligations. It cited clause numbers, milestone dates, uptime figures, data volumes. It demanded written confirmation of compliance within 48 hours. It stated clearly that failure to respond would be interpreted as an inability to confirm compliance, at which point Vanguard would be compelled to suspend all payments pending independent investigation. If you send this, I said, looking up from the page, Greg will panic. Brett will scream. They'll have no idea what they're actually looking at. Good, Robert said. They've been padding support hours in their quarterly invoices for 6 months. I've been looking for a legitimate basis to apply pressure and request a comprehensive audit. You've just handed me exactly what I needed. He leaned forward slightly. You understand that once I send this, there's no reversing course. They will figure out eventually that it traces back to you. They'll suspect, I said. They won't be able to prove I initiated it. And even if they could, retaliation against an employee for asserting contractual rights regarding her own compensation, in California. Treble damages, Robert said, pronouncing the legal term with the quiet appreciation of someone who has seen what those words can do to a balance sheet. Exactly. Do it. He signaled for the check. I'll send it tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'd suggest you be in the office. We didn't shake hands when we parted. We didn't need to. We were two people who understood the mechanics of the process that had just been set in motion, and who both knew that what came next would happen exactly as it was designed to happen. I walked out into the California afternoon, and felt lighter than I had in years. I went back to the office. I sat at my desk and answered emails and helped a junior associate fix a formatting error in an NDA, and was thoroughly, professionally pleasant to everyone who interacted with me for the remainder of the day. I watched Tyler from HR walk past holding a green smoothie and wearing noise-canceling headphones. He didn't glance in my direction. Enjoy the smoothie, Tyler, I thought quietly. It might be the last thing you consume without some degree of background anxiety for a while. Tuesday morning. 9:02 a.m. The email from Vanguard Legal entered the Zephyr Stream server. Flagged high importance. I sat at my desk and monitored the internal forwarding trail with the focused attention of someone who has written enough email policies to know exactly how information moves through a company when people are trying to avoid dealing with it. 9:15 a.m. Brett forwarded it to Greg. Greg, handle this. Probably just standard compliance noise. Don't let it slow down the queue for pipeline. 9:30 a.m. Greg forwarded it to Chad. Chad, they're asking about royalty structures. Do we have any of those? Just send them some generic financials and move on. 9:45 a.m. Greg forwarded it to me. Mara, Vanguard sent some formal nonsense about an IP audit and Clause 14C. Sounds like legacy contract gibberish. Can you draft a standard "we are in full compliance" response? Don't spend too much time on it, I need you on the merger due diligence. THX, I sat very still and stared at the screen. I had to press my lips together to keep from making any sound that could be heard over the partition. They hadn't read it. They hadn't opened the attachment where Robert had meticulously listed every milestone date, every uptime figure, every dollar amount of the outstanding obligation. They had seen Clause 14C in the subject line, failed to recognize what it was, and forwarded it through 3 levels of executive management until it landed in the inbox of the one person in the entire company who had written it, signed it, and was currently entitled to collect on it. They had asked the arsonist to investigate the smell of smoke. I hit reply. Hi Greg, I'll log this in the compliance tracker. I need to pull the original executed files to verify the specific language of Clause 14C and cross-reference with the relevant performance period logs. This may take a few days to do properly. I'll keep you updated. Mara. Sure thing, Greg replied within 45 seconds. Take your time. Take my time. The Vanguard letter demanded a response within 48 hours. Thursday morning at 9 a.m. If the deadline passed without a substantive response, Vanguard had explicitly reserved the right to suspend all payments pending investigation. I opened a new encrypted folder on my personal drive. I named it Contingency Escalation. Into it I placed the following documents. The original HR email from Tyler denying my raise. Time-stamped, preserved in its original formatting. The email from Greg asking me to handle the compliance audit regarding my own unpaid royalties, which was, on reflection, one of the more remarkable pieces of documentary irony I had encountered in 15 years of contract work. A PDF export of a Slack conversation from the previous year in which Chad, CFO, had made a joke about structuring year-end accounting to reduce the bonus pool visibility on the quarterly board report. I archive everything. It is never a good idea to irritate the person who manages the data retention policy. Wednesday passed in a blur of surreal, almost dreamlike normalcy. I sat through an all-hands meeting where Brett stood on a literal stage, yes, we had a stage, and presented slides celebrating our record-breaking uptime numbers. The exact numbers that had triggered Clause 14C. He was celebrating the performance that was about to cost him everything he had. And then Thursday morning, at 9 o'clock, the clock ran out. Wednesday felt like watching a slow-motion sequence that you know ends badly and cannot stop. I sat in the company all-hands meeting and watched Brett Sterling stand on the break room stage. Yes, the break room had a stage, because someone in facilities management had at some point decided this was a reasonable use of square footage, and deliver a presentation about Zephyr Stream's operational excellence. This quarter is looking absolutely incredible, Brett said into the microphone, his t-shirt reading disrupt under a blazer that I happened to know cost $2,000 because I had processed the expense report. Vanguard is thrilled with our performance. We are looking at a 20% growth trajectory. Our uptime numbers are unprecedented. We are, genuinely, unstoppable. I stood at the back of the room, and watched him put the milestone numbers on the slide behind him. The exact numbers I had pulled from the data warehouse 2 days earlier. The exact numbers that had triggered Clause 14C 18 months ago. He was celebrating the evidence of his own liability to a room full of witnesses. I looked at Greg sitting in the third row. He was scrolling through something on his phone under the table. He had completely forgotten about the Vanguard email. To him it had been a task. He had delegated it to the help. The help was handling it. End of cognitive engagement. I felt something that surprised me, not contempt exactly, and not pity exactly, but something in between. The particular feeling of watching someone walk very confidently towards something they cannot see. Thursday arrived with the quiet inevitability of everything that had been carefully set in motion. The 48-hour deadline hit at 9 a.m. I did not send the compliance response. I did not draft the "We are in full compliance" letter. I updated the internal tracking ticket with the following notation: status, pending legal review. Awaiting executive authorization for formal response. Technically accurate. I was waiting for an executive to authorize the response. No executive had read the letter carefully enough to understand that authorization was required. At 5 p.m., the deadline expired. At 5:01 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Robert. Radio silence from their end. Correct, I replied. They delegated the audit response to me. I'm reviewing. Robert sent back a single emoji. The trap had closed. Now came the part where I needed a lawyer. Saturday morning I sat in the office of Alina, my personal attorney. The office was in a strip mall in Sunnyvale, wedged between a nail salon and a Thai massage parlor. The waiting room had fluorescent lighting and 3-year-old magazines. None of this was relevant to her professional capabilities. Alina had spent 22 years dismantling corporate fraud cases. She had a success rate that her peers discussed in tones that fell somewhere between admiration and genuine unease. She had, on 2 separate occasions, made senior partners at major firms cry, not out of cruelty, but simply because she was always more prepared than they were and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. I laid everything on her desk. The original binder. The emails. The HR denial from Tyler. The complete forwarding trail of the Vanguard audit notice. The internal system screenshots. The notes I had taken. And the documentation from the Friday finance meeting. Which is where I need to pause and tell you what happened on Friday. Because what happened in that conference room changed the nature of this situation significantly. The Friday Audit Committee meeting. These were usually 45-minute sessions in which Chad, the CFO, explained in elaborate creative language why Zephyr Stream was spending more money than it was supposed to, while simultaneously claiming that this was strategically intentional. This particular Friday had a different energy. We gathered in the conference room with glass walls and chairs that had been selected by someone who prioritized aesthetics over the possibility of sitting in them for longer than 20 minutes. Chad stood at the head of the table in a vest that cost more than my monthly rent. Vanguard payments are flagged this month, he said. Accounts receivable shows the wire as pending. Anyone know why? My heart did exactly one slow, deliberate thud. Robert had moved. Probably a banking delay, Greg said from the middle of the table, spinning a pen between his fingers. I'll reach out. Do that, Chad said. We need that liquidity for the Q4 offsite. And then a voice from the end of the table. Kevin. Kevin was 22 years old, fresh out of Stanford's economics program, and possessed of the particular brightness of someone who has been genuinely excellent at nearly everything his entire life, and hasn't yet fully developed the professional instinct for when to apply that excellence quietly. Actually, I was reviewing the liability ledger yesterday, and I noticed a flag on the contingent liabilities tab. Something categorized as royalty class B. It's accruing at 0.5% of gross. I thought it might be worth. Royalties. Chad's frown was immediate and dismissive. We're a software platform. We don't pay royalties. It's in the legacy contract documentation, Kevin said, and I could hear the slight waver in his voice, the sound of someone who is correct, and knows he is correct, but is beginning to wonder whether being correct is going to be as useful as he had assumed. Clause 14C. The system auto-flagged it because our uptime numbers crossed a threshold. I think it might be. Greg, Chad said. What is the kid talking about? Greg looked at Kevin with the expression of someone confronting a minor inconvenience. I don't know. Legacy boilerplate from the previous legal team. Ignore it. I can't really ignore a flagged contingent liability, Kevin said. His voice was steady, but the color had shifted slightly in his face. If the auditors run their queue for review and see. Kevin. Chad's voice dropped to the particular register that certain people use when they want a conversation to end. We are not paying royalties. Delete the flag. Reclassify it as a system error. We are trying to scale this company, and I don't need the analytical team finding problems that don't exist. I watched Kevin very carefully. He looked at his screen. Then he looked up. His eyes crossed the table and found mine. He knew I handled contracts. He knew I had been at Zephyr Stream longer than almost anyone. I held his gaze steadily. I didn't shake my head. I didn't nod. I gave him a look that communicated, as clearly as I could without moving a single facial muscle, that what was happening in this room was not something he wanted to be on the wrong side of, and that compliance under documented duress was very different legally from voluntary participation. Kevin looked back at Chad. But if the contract specifies, delete the flag. Kevin. Chad's patience had reached its terminal point. Reclassify it as a data entry error and let's move on. Kevin's shoulders dropped perhaps a quarter of an inch. Okay, he said quietly. Reclassifying. He typed the command. The red flag disappeared from the liability dashboard. In doing so, Chad had just ordered the willful suppression of a documented financial obligation in a monitored business system, in front of multiple witnesses, while under existing notice from a counterparty that had already flagged the precise issue being suppressed. I opened my notebook and wrote, in my cleanest handwriting, 10:14 a.m., CFO directs deletion of Clause 14C liability flag. Junior analyst complies under explicit directive. Witnesses present. Then Chad turned to me. Mara, you're the one who tracks this IP stuff. We don't have any outstanding royalty obligations, right? I looked at him across the conference table. The contract language is very specific, Chad, I said. My voice was completely level. Clause 14C exists in the executed agreement. It was signed by the previous executive leadership. Whether or not the company chooses to recognize the triggered liability is an accounting decision. It is not a contractual decision. Right, Chad said, turning back to the room with the confident satisfaction of a man who has heard what he wanted to hear. Accounting decision. I've decided it's 0. Moving on. Tahoe offsite, somebody get me an agenda. He had heard you can decide. He had not heard you are currently committing fraud. After the meeting, a Slack message appeared from Kevin. That clause, it had your initials in the draft history. You wrote it, didn't you? I typed back immediately. Kevin, if I were you, I would send an email to Chad right now confirming his exact verbal instruction to delete that flag. Send it to his direct email. BCC your personal address. Subject line should reference today's date and the meeting. Do it now, before you forget the exact wording he used. A long pause. The Kevin is typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again for a very long time. Then disappeared. 10 minutes later, I received a BCC on a message from Kevin to Chad. Subject, confirmation, instruction to reclassify royalty flag, date. Chad, following up on this morning's audit committee discussion. Per your direction, I have removed the contingent liability flag for Clause 14C royalties and reclassified it as a data entry error in the system. Please let me know if you need anything further on this. Kevin. Smart kid. He had just built himself a life raft with a paper trail. As for Chad, he had just documented his own fraud in writing and asked someone else to confirm it. Back to Alina's office. She read through everything with her face completely, professionally still, the expression of someone who has heard many alarming things, and has long since decided that alarm is not a productive response to information. She flipped pages with a rhythmic, deliberate snap. 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 Finally she set the last document down, and looked at me over her glasses. They are remarkably stupid. They're arrogant, I said. There's a meaningful difference. There is, she agreed. Stupid people make mistakes because they don't know better. Arrogant people make mistakes because they genuinely believe the rules don't apply to them. Arrogant people are actually easier to build cases against, because they don't bother to hide what they're doing. She folded her hands on the desk. Here is what's going to happen. Vanguard files the breach of contract suit. The moment Zephyr Stream is served, they are going to panic, and panicking companies in breach of contract always do the same thing, they look for someone internal to blame. They will attempt to terminate your employment for negligence. Specifically, they'll argue you failed to notify them about the Clause 14C obligations. Which is when we file. Which is when we file, she confirmed. Whistleblower protection. Wage theft. Retaliation for assertion of contractual rights. And given what happened in that Friday meeting, she tapped the notes I had taken, Sarbanes-Oxley violations for the willful suppression of a documented liability. I don't want to destroy the company, I said. I just want what the contract says is mine, and a formal acknowledgement that what they did was wrong. Alina looked at me with the gentle patience of someone explaining something necessary to someone who already knows it. Mara. You don't get one without the other. A company that treats people the way they've treated you does not change because you asked politely. You have to make the cost of continued non-compliance greater than the cost of doing the right thing. She drafted the letter of representation that evening. Don't send it yet, she said, sliding the sealed envelope across the desk. Wait until you hear that Vanguard has filed. Then, 10 minutes later, you walk into that building and hand this to HR personally. It freezes all employment action against you. They cannot terminate you while you have an active legal claim regarding the core issue of the suit they're defending. It makes me untouchable. For the duration of the proceedings, she said. Yes. Sunday night I sat in my living room in the dark. The television was off. The apartment was quiet. Caesar was asleep somewhere in the back of the house. I sat and thought about the past 5 years. The late nights. The weekends. The vendor emergencies that consumed holidays. The time I had missed my niece's baptism because 3 servers had failed simultaneously, and I had spent 6 hours in my car on a Sunday reviewing emergency contract modifications while my family went to brunch afterward and sent me pictures. I had given them everything I had. And they had sent me a $50 gift card and a lazy Friday email about budget reallocation. Lost in legal, I whispered to the dark apartment. It wasn't about the money. It hadn't been about the money for years. It was about the fact that they had looked at me, really looked at me, or failed to, which was exactly the point, and seen nothing worth acknowledging. Tomorrow they were going to look at me. And finally understand exactly what they had been ignoring. I laid out my outfit. A black blazer. Sharp collar. The kind of clothes you wear when you are about to walk into a room and change what happens in it permanently. I checked my email one last time. Nothing from Chad. Nothing from Greg. Nothing from Brett. They were sleeping soundly somewhere, dreaming of Q4 offsites in Tahoe. I turned off the light. Sleep well, I said to the dark. Winter is here. Monday. 8:45 a.m. Brett was on the stage in the break room telling 200 people about our incredible Vanguard partnership and our unstoppable growth trajectory. I was standing at the back near the exit with my arms crossed and my badge in my pocket and a lean sealed envelope in my blazer. I checked my watch. And then the double doors at the back of the room opened. And it wasn't a late employee. The monthly all-hands meeting at Zephyr Stream was a ritual. Brett would stand on the stage. He would tell everyone they were changing the world. He would show slides with upward trending graphs. He would use the word velocity at least 3 times. The employees would hold their coffees and nod with the particular practiced attentiveness of people who have learned that appearing engaged is not the same as being engaged. This Monday had the same structure. But the energy was different. There was a restlessness in the room I couldn't quite locate until I realized it was coming from me, from the very specific stillness I was maintaining while everything around me moved in its normal patterns, unaware that the patterns were about to be permanently disrupted. This quarter is looking absolutely extraordinary, Brett said into the microphone from the stage. Our Vanguard partnership is stronger than it has ever been. Our uptime numbers are setting records. Our engineering team has delivered something truly remarkable. We are, without question, unstoppable. I stood at the back of the room near the exit and checked my watch. 8:52 a.m. The double doors opened. Not a late employee. 2 men in dark suits who were dressed with the specific, unambiguous formality of people who work in federal legal proceedings and have learned that appearance communicates authority before any words are spoken. Behind them, Robert Vance. Silver-haired. Bespoke suit. Moving through the room with the unhurried, absolute confidence of a man who is about to do exactly what he came to do, and has done it many times before. The energy in the room shifted before anyone could articulate why. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The ripple of confusion moved from the back of the room toward the stage in a slow, visible wave. Brett stopped mid-sentence. Can I help you? Robert walked directly to the stage. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Brett. Brett Sterling. Yeah. Who are you? One of the men in suits stepped forward and extended a thick stack of documents, bound with a heavy clip, each page printed on the slightly heavier paper that legal filings use. You are being served. Civil lawsuit for breach of contract, intellectual property theft, and willful noncompliance with vendor licensing obligations. Plaintiff, Vanguard Defense Logistics. The room went silent. Completely, utterly silent. The espresso machine was still hissing in the kitchen down the hall. Someone's phone buzzed on a tabletop and nobody moved to pick it up. What? Brett laughed. The laugh of someone who is hoping very much that this is not what it obviously is. Is this, Chad, is this some kind of thing? Greg? Greg pushed through the crowd to the front of the room. Robert, what the hell? We have a review meeting scheduled for. We had a response deadline, Robert said. It expired Thursday morning at 9 a.m. You failed to provide any substantive response to a formal notice of contractual audit. Per Clause 14C of the Master Service Agreement and Section 9 of the Licensing Addendum, Vanguard is immediately terminating the service agreement for cause and initiating damages proceedings for unauthorized use of unlicensed intellectual property. Terminating, Brett's face had gone a color that I can only describe as the specific gray of someone who has just understood the full weight of what they're holding. You cannot terminate. That's an $80 million relationship. It was an $80 million relationship, Robert said. The correction was quiet and absolute. It is now a claim for $120 million, including treble damages for willful suppression of known liabilities identified during our preliminary review. Willful suppression, Chad said from the edge of the stage. His voice had climbed approximately half an octave. We have documented evidence, Robert said, and his eyes moved across the room with the slow deliberation of a man who knows exactly where he's looking. That your executive leadership ordered the deletion of a flagged financial liability directly related to the IP architect's royalty obligations, and directed a junior employee to reclassify that liability as a system error. His gaze found me at the back of the room. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I adjusted my glasses slightly and held his gaze for exactly 1 second. Robert looked back at Brett. Your license to operate the software is revoked effective today, unless you can provide documented proof that all outstanding obligations to the IP architect have been satisfied in full. Brett looked down at the papers in his hands. He flipped to the referenced page. IP architect, we own the IP. We developed this in-house. Read page 42, Brett, Robert said. Clause 14C. You don't own the algorithm outright until the royalty has been paid. The royalty was triggered 18 months ago. It has not been paid. Greg reached over and took the papers from Brett. He scanned the page. His hands were still. And then I watched the exact moment it landed. I have been in enough negotiations to recognize the physiological response of someone understanding something they cannot undo. The slight pause in breathing. The very specific stillness. Greg's hands began to shake. The papers rattled audibly. The raise, he whispered. He looked up from the page. The cost of living adjustment. He looked at the back of the room. 200 people followed his gaze. To where I was standing. By the exit. In my black blazer. I didn't look down. I didn't shift my weight. I didn't do anything except walk forward, steadily, through the crowd that parted in front of me, all the way to the stage. Mara, Brett's voice was very quiet. What is going on? I think, I said, and my voice carried across the silent room clearly and without effort, that my raise just got found illegal. I reached into my blazer pocket and produced Alina's envelope. I handed it to Greg. This is from my attorney. I believe it belongs to your department. Then I turned to Robert. Shall we find a conference room? It seems there's some negotiating to be done. After you, Miss Lays, Robert said. We walked out of the break room together. Behind us, the silence lasted exactly 3 more seconds. Then it shattered. 10 minutes later, we were in the boardroom. Clean table. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the bay that nobody was looking at. The thick stack of lawsuit papers sitting in the center of the table like an object that had changed the nature of the room simply by existing in it. Robert and I on one side. Brett, Chad, and Greg on the other. Brett looked like a man sitting in a chair that had somehow become much smaller than it was when he sat down. Mara, he said. Look. We can fix this. We can unlock the raise right now. Retroactive. 5%. 10%. Whatever you need. I looked at him. Brett. We are significantly past 10%. Here is the current legal reality, Robert said, with the calm efficiency of someone reading a weather report. Zephyr Stream owes Miss Lays approximately $482,000 in back royalties with accrued interest. Additionally, because your CFO directed the deletion of a documented financial liability while under existing notice from Vanguard, and because that instruction was confirmed in writing by the employee who executed it, the officers involved are potentially facing personal liability under Sarbanes-Oxley. Chad made a sound. Kevin, he said. Very quietly. Kevin is a 22-year-old junior analyst who followed a direct order from his CFO under duress, and had the presence of mind to document that instruction immediately afterward, I said. Leave him out of this. So what is it you actually want? Brett asked. He had reached the stage of negotiation where the performance of confidence has been entirely abandoned. The money? Fine. We pay the $482,000. Just make the Vanguard suit go away. We cannot lose that contract. I slid a single piece of paper across the table. The term sheet Alina and I had drafted. 1. Immediate payment of all back royalties and interest. $482,000, confirmed in writing. 2. A formal written acknowledgement from the board that administrative failures in the compensation review process resulted in non-compliance with contractual obligations. 3. Reinstatement of the royalty clause with a documented penalty multiplier for any future notification delays. For all legal fees paid in full. Brett read it. Then he read it again. This is a significant amount of money, Mara. It is considerably less money than losing an $80 million client, Robert observed pleasantly. And one more thing, I said. All three of them looked up at the same time. I want a promotion. Director of Contract Compliance and IP Governance, reporting directly to the board. Not to the legal department. I no longer have confidence that the legal department reads documents with the necessary thoroughness. Greg flinched. Full authority to conduct compliance audits of all executive vendor agreements and related expense documentation. Chad's expression shifted in a way I found very satisfying. He knew exactly what was in the executive expense reports. The client entertainment that had taken place in locations that had no clients. The travel that consistently routed through wine country. The consulting fees paid to family members of the people approving the consulting fees. You cannot have access to those reports, Chad said. Then Robert proceeds with the lawsuit, I said simply. And the discovery process compels access to everything anyway. Your choice. Chad. A compliance audit conducted internally by me, or a forensic audit conducted externally by the federal court. I am genuinely happy with either outcome. The air conditioning ran. No one spoke. Brett sat back in his chair. He looked at me across the table with the expression of someone who has just finished losing an argument they didn't realize they were in until it was over. Fine, he said. All of it. Done. Robert produced the settlement agreement from his briefcase. I watched them sign. Brett's signature was heavy and slow. Chad signed the way people sign things they would rather not be signing. Greg signed with the resignation of someone who has had a very long day and expects tomorrow to be longer. When it was done, I gathered the documents. Thank you, I said. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some work to do. It appears there was a compliance issue that got lost in legal. I'm going to go make sure it doesn't happen again. The wire transfer arrived on Wednesday morning. $482,340.12. I sat at my desk and looked at the number on my banking app for a long time. It looked like the answer to a question I had been asking for years. The weeks that followed were quiet in the specific way that things get quiet after something large has passed through and rearranged everything. Brett stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on what the press release called long-term strategic vision. The board had some thoughts about his management approach following the near-catastrophic loss of the company's largest client. Chad decided to pursue other opportunities. I watched him carry a box of personal items to his car from my new corner office window on a Tuesday morning. He didn't look back. The first audit of his expense documentation had surfaced some invoices that required a level of explanation he was ultimately unable to provide. Greg remained. But he was a different Greg. A Greg who kept his door closed. A Greg who had recently developed what appeared to be a genuine interest in actually reading the contracts his department was responsible for. A Greg who nodded respectfully in hallways and moved on quickly. I got the corner office. The one with the view of the bay. I replaced the neon "Hustle Harder" sign with a painting I liked. My title is Director of Strategic Compliance and IP Governance. I hired Kevin as my senior analyst. He is meticulous, thorough, and constitutionally incapable of ignoring a red cell in a spreadsheet. We have a simple policy in our department. We read everything. We flag everything. And we never delete a liability because someone tells us it's inconvenient. 6 months later, an email arrived from Tyler in HR. Subject: Annual Review, Compensation Adjustment. Hi Mara, just wanted to confirm that your updated compensation package has been fully reviewed and approved by the board. No issues at all this time. Best, Tyler. I smiled. I took a sip of tea, the expensive kind, imported from Kyoto, which I now expense to the company as a professional research cost, because I drafted the expense policy, and I know exactly what it covers. I hit reply. Thanks, Tyler. Make sure it's filed correctly this time. We wouldn't want it to get lost in legal again. I closed my laptop. The sun was going down over Silicon Valley, throwing long gold shadows through my corner office windows across the bay. They say the devil is in the details. They're wrong. The devil is the person who reads the details. And she just got a corner office with a view. If this story found you at the right moment, share it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been told your raise is in the pipeline while watching someone else buy a new boat, you already know how this story feels. Subscribe. I'll be here. Take care of yourselves.